Hello and welcome to this week's episode of GIANT's Healthy Innovators Live TV. My name is Barry Shrier and I'm your host. I'd like to welcome the many tens of thousands of viewers from around the world who come to us every week to meet some of the most interesting and talented and ambitious healthcare and technology innovators and entrepreneurs. So welcome to our audience. We love serving you guys and we hope to hear from you. If any of you have any suggestions regarding what you'd like us to talk about or who you'd like to have on the show, don't forget to send us a message. Our website is www.giant.health. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to Vodafone Business. We love working with you guys, and we're very proud to have you as sponsors. Lastly, we have one new announcement, which is that this year, GIANT Health has launched European Health Tech Innovation Week. This is 5 exciting and important one-day conferences taking place from the 17th to the 21st of May in 5 of the leading healthcare innovation cities and regions across Europe. So we have 5 one-day conferences taking place in Liverpool, Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, and Barcelona. So once again, please go to the GIANT website, www.giant.health, where you can learn more about that. And we invite you to come along and participate in European Health Tech Innovation Week. Anyhow, we got some brilliant people on the episode this week. Just like every week, we have incredibly impressive, talented people, and I'm very proud to have you guys joining us. So Chris, hello, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Barry. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. No, it's a pleasure to have you on board. Thank you. And hi, Carrie. Hello. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Great to be here.
Excellent. And Brian, hello. Thank you. Calling in from Portland, Maine, are we?
Yes, we are. Good morning, Barry. Thank you for the time. Thank you for letting me be here.
No, it's good stuff, and I'm glad you could join us. And so what we want to do, you guys, like we do every week, we want to talk about some of the biggest challenges in healthcare and what are we doing to address some of these challenges. So Chris, if you don't mind, if I could ask you first, what's an example of a big challenge in society and in healthcare, and what are you involved in?
Awesome. Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges in healthcare right now, is all centered around accessibility. I think it's a very broad term that can be taken in many different ways. The most obvious ones are high costs and long waiting lists. I think UK has done a great job in terms of reducing those costs, but the waiting list is still definitely a problem.
Yes.
US may be a bit different in either sort of way. But then there's accessibility in sort of different ways in terms of people building products for consumers that consumers don't want and don't engage with. And so if you don't build a product that users love, it's very hard to make it accessible to them in a way that actually works. And so you can build the most effective product, you can build the most effective digital outcome, but if you don't have adherence, if you don't have engagement, if you don't have retention, then that's not an accessible product. And so I think that the broadening of what accessible is into more of like an integrative approach, which is not only working with the patient, but it's working with the patient in a way that the clinician is educating that patient so that they can actually follow through with that outcome. You've got products that they enjoy to use and not being shoved down to them by someone who, I think that sort of broadening of like accessibility is a big problem right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And that comes up frequently in our weekly episodes here of Healthy Innovators Live TV. So, Chris, thank you for mentioning that. And this accessibility thing is very, very important, obviously. Looking forward to hearing more about that and hearing what you're doing these days in a little bit. And Carrie, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're talking about big challenges in healthcare. What's another example of a challenge in society or an issue in healthcare? And what are you involved in?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about accessibility. And I think the flip side of that is how do you create almost mass personalization opportunities? So creating access is one thing, but making it still feel personalized for the patient or whoever's engaging in that intervention is really important. And how do you not lose that sense of kind of in-person feel you can get from a provider, but if you create more digital experiences. So that's something our fund, I'm an investor for a healthcare venture fund, part of McKesson Ventures. And that's one of the areas we're really thinking about digital health and tech-enabled services that enable that access, but also create really high quality interventions and that feel of personalization as part of the patient journey.
Absolutely. And I think that mass personalization and the digitalization of health are so interesting because, of course, that can literally be a driver for accessibility itself and whatever challenges we've had in the past. As an example, the chairman of GIANT Health is Professor Shafi Ahmed, who is a high-profile innovator in cancer surgery, but also in the applications of virtual reality and other immersive tech for educational purposes. So in terms of accessibility, he did the world's first live 360 video surgical procedure, which was witnessed by 25,000 Chinese medical students live. So I suppose in terms of accessibility, I guess there's an example of how with technology and innovation, you can make medical education more accessible versus the traditional 1-to-1 or 1-to-5 or 1-to-10 medical instructor to medical student. And no, but Carrie, very good point. And we'd like to hear more about that in this conversations. So thank you for that. And this broad, we're talking about big issues in healthcare and some of the biggest challenges in society. What are you working on? And what would you say is another issue here that we can talk about?
Well, I love talking about the topics that were brought up as it relates to access. And as I think about access, I actually take a little bit of a different approach to that because sort of when I think about access, I think about access to healthcare in general. You know, where I grew up in Maine, about 5 hours north of Boston, in a very small town, access to healthcare meant actually access to basic services in healthcare. So let alone a specialty, but actually people driving an hour to see a primary care physician.
Right.
And so as we think about access, it was really how do we provide access to high quality care that doesn't even mean specialties, right, in these more rural areas of the country. And I think that as we pair that with, if we look at the landscape of healthcare, there's also tremendous unmet needs still. Even with the advancements of healthcare that we're seeing, there are so many disease states and diagnoses that have high unmet needs. And I think that the sort of technologies that we're building and the digital therapeutics, digital health that we're building, I mean, that's really the promise of the industry, is being able to deliver high quality care, regardless of geography, to anybody around the world. And I think, you know, if you look at the field of healthcare over the last year, something like a global pandemic, I think has catalyzed people's awareness to the need for remote healthcare in a high quality way, even for people who aren't in rural places of countries. The people are in metro centers still need remote healthcare, but delivered in a high quality way.
Yes, no, I agree with you, Brian, entirely. And of course, the global pandemic is a terrible tragedy for many, many people around the world. But the fact that it has perhaps served as a little bit of an impetus to accelerate the adoption of technology and innovation and things like telemedicine and remote consultations can only be a good thing. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, we want to talk about digital therapeutics today, and obviously this is an area which has been around for quite a while from one perspective, but from another perspective, it's quite new. So, Chris, as an example, what are you guys doing, and how does that overlap with the world of digital therapeutics? And if you want to elaborate on that, we'd love to hear more from you, please.
Awesome. Yeah. So at Mindset Health, what we do is we build hypnosis-based digital therapeutics for chronic health conditions, starting with irritable bowel syndrome, so IBS, gut health condition. And I think that is the sort of angle that we're tackling digital therapeutics with. It's where can we bring in hypnosis as a modality to deliver therapy for different health conditions that maybe people don't think you can deliver therapy for. So hypnosis, IBS, menopause, chronic pain, migraines. And so these conditions that aren't necessarily thought to have been helped with digital therapeutics. So I think that when I think about what a digital therapeutic is, it's a therapeutic outcome associated or delivered through a digital means. And so it's very much just the word itself, and not very insightful. But I think there's something there where it's like that's what it is, and you can take it at least in my mind, you can take it and you go to all different directions with it. But effectively, is it digital by nature, and is it delivering a therapeutic outcome?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a very, very helpful and very concise definition. I appreciate that. So just for the sake of argument, Chris, what's wrong with any traditional therapies? Why is digital needed at all? Or in what ways is digital better? If I have, for example, IBS, can I not just take some pills for that?
IBS is an interesting case because you can't take pills for it. You can go see you can take symptom-specific pills, but there's no specific generalized IBS pill.
Okay.
You could go see a therapist, for example, but costs upwards of, in Australia at least, upwards of $1,000. Over in the US, upwards of $1,000. In Australia, upwards of $1,500 for like a 6-week program. And that's alongside a 6-month waiting list. And the other side of the flip side of coins was like where does digital therapeutics get an actual advantage in that situation? And is that a digital therapeutic never gets hungover, a digital therapeutic never gets tired, a digital therapeutic can react and respond to real-time feedback. It can be tracked in real-world pragmatic clinical trials. It can get better over time. And how we sort of think about it is like, can you get the best person in the world, put them into a product as a baseline? So we work with like world-leading researchers, we get their clinical trials, and we help work with them and pull it into products. And then how can we make them better? How can we give them the data to be able to improve the product? How can we get them the data to show that digital therapeutics are more effective than drugs, which we're doing? I'm pretty confident in that.
Yes, that's outstanding, Chris, and congratulations on what you guys have accomplished so far, and very, very interesting. So,
Barry, if I could add to that, I mean, I think it's a very compelling question, because I also don't think, as we think about what's wrong with current standard of care, that it's always an either-or scenario where it's a pharma or digital therapeutics. We're building standalone digital therapeutics that are getting drug-like outcomes that could rival drugs outcomes that the drugs are currently getting in current standard of care. But so sometimes it could be a replacement. We know that some drugs have poor side effects or aren't always effective in a number of cases, that perhaps digital therapeutics could have less side effects or be more effective. And to Chris's point about our learning that we can gather from the data that we're collecting due to the technology implications of digital therapeutics can help us to make the products better over time, which pharma can't do. But I think it's more about the right intervention at the right time for the right patient. And that's the wonderful thing about digital therapeutics. It's something else in the bag that somebody can have along their patient journey. Or as we think about it at MedRhythms too, is thinking about, well, could a digital therapeutic plus a drug enhance an outcome more than either one alone? So 1 + 1 = 3 outcome. So I think it's important to lay out the entire sort of platform of potentials, that it could be either or in combo with. But it's really about providing the right intervention, the best intervention to the right patient at the right time.
Yes, exactly. I guess that's a little bit like the concept of mass personalization that Carrie mentioned earlier, in terms of making sure that it is delivered exactly for the individual patient's requirements. So, Carrie, what's your take on all this? And tell us about your involvement in DTX, please.
Sure. So, agree with what both of them have said. And the only other thing I'd add, just from where I sit, is the digital therapeutic itself could be a kind of generally available solution, or it may need to be via prescription. And I do think the prescription digital therapeutics space is still evolving. There are a couple of early leaders in that space, but I think we're much more in a place, in my opinion, where it's truly about access, and really, certainly in the United States, it's about how are you going to market, who is the customer, and who's the ultimate payer versus who's the ultimate user of the therapeutic. And that has opened up a very different kind of commercial landscape, so to speak, in healthcare, really thinking about the employer, the self-insured employer versus the payer versus the provider, the government. And so it can be complex in many cases for these new technologies to come to market. I think we're hitting kind of a slightly better, more momentous state as far as kind of getting these products in the market and starting to see more adoption from a reimbursement perspective. But that's maybe one other factor, just kind of from an almost infrastructure foundational piece, is the best possible technology, the most robust evidence bases are really, I think, there's quite a bit of that now, and starting to finally see the infrastructure come into play to get to that access that we were talking about, and make it possible to prescribe or order these types of solutions. The only other thing I'd add is my background is really in digital therapeutics. I started kind of in the space at Health. So they were focused on reducing risk for obesity-related chronic disease. And ultimately, we were moving more into almost disease management or condition management around obesity-related disease. So really taking an existing evidence base and digitizing it, like you mentioned, Barry. So it's not saying brick and mortar or in person is no longer relevant. It's saying for some people, it just isn't an option, depending on where you live or how you like to learn or how you like to engage. And so can we give options to as many people as possible and make that care and not just high quality, but equitable, regardless of demographics and geography. So that's really where I got my start and my excitement about the space.
Yes. Are you still at Armada Health now?
I am not. So I'm with McKesson Ventures now. I had been with McKesson Ventures previously, and left for the opportunity to join Omada, and then got lured back to McKesson when the venture fund started. So the fund's been around about 6 years, and we're primarily investing in digital health, digital therapeutics type plays and tech-enabled healthcare services.
Brilliant. Excellent. Oh, glad to have you guys making important investments in an incredibly important sector. Sometimes when the conversation of digital therapeutics comes up, the phrase Wild West comes into the conversation. Obviously, everybody, I think, is aware of the fact that there's many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of apps that you can put onto your smartphone, which have some type of health claim to them, whether they are about wellness or healthcare. What's the issue relating to, what do you want to call it, quality control? And for example, we've heard in this conversation already the theme of prescribed therapeutics. About things which should be prescribed only, or are we talking about the broader category of wellness apps that anybody can knock together over a weekend in their student dormitory?
I think you cut out a bit, but.
So I'm just asking, Chris, what's your take on the theme of prescription and evidence, and where should digital therapeutics, where should they reside, and what are the issues relating to the consumer and apps which maybe don't have evidence-based approaches and are not necessarily being prescribed?
Yeah, so I think probably similar to what Carrie said before, in terms of there's definitely two different specific options, and depending on the health condition, for example, if you're working in a very high risk health condition, you should be prescribed. If you're working in a low risk health condition, well, that's depends on sort of how low the risk is, but it does change. And so I think evidence as a foundation is there, regardless of whether prescribed or not. I don't think prescription is evidence and evidence is prescription. And obviously that foundation needs to be there. And like, I think our approach, similar to a couple other companies in the digital therapeutics space, is find existing research where we know that the evidence and the foundation is there. Work with the researcher, the lead researcher of those studies, and help digitalize that research. And then we can use that as a foundation where we know we're coming from that sort of evidence foundation.
Yes.
Currently our products aren't prescription only. We don't expect them to be prescription only. We're specifically going after conditions where we can target direct to consumer, and our payer is the consumer. We build for the consumer, and this is all very specific. And so, yeah, if we were working in conditions that were higher risk, we would, prescription obviously makes sense.
No, it's a very interesting space, isn't it? And there's so much development. I'm sorry, Carrie, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to add one other thing, kind of from a definition standpoint, and I'm curious, Brian or Chris, what you think of this, but I was just adding on is is the intervention kind of standalone or not? Is it pure software as a drug or as a therapeutic versus some of the programs that have a software element, maybe a hardware element, and have a coach or some type of human intervention that may be dialed up or down depending on the need?
Yes.
From what we've seen, it seems like anything that would go the prescription route or require prescription has to be this much more standalone, kind of tightly kind of end-to-end packaged, software as a drug. And then that's one thing that we're kind of keeping our eye on to see if that persists, or how they manage sort of the pairing of a coach or some type of clinician with the software. I haven't yet seen that go to market as prescription only.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would, that's a good point. And I think as we think about prescription versus non-prescription, I mean, a lot of that has to do with the risk profile, but I think an important sort of caveat to this is really more around regulation versus non-regulation. So sort of FDA versus non-FDA or regulatory bodies, because that's really more around safety and efficacy and the claims that you're making. So for example, at MedRhythms, we're building digital therapeutics for people with neurologic injury or disease. So that's stroke, Parkinson's disease, MS, where we are seeing drug-like outcomes. We're making claims on specific functions as a standalone product, so therefore prescription products. But I also think it's, as you think about prescription versus non-prescription and regulated versus not, it's really a risk profile. right? It's ensuring that the consumer knows the risks involved, the potential outcomes, and that obviously you're making appropriate claims for the product that you have, which is hopefully backed up by evidence in one way or another. And so I think it's an important nuance to that conversation as you think about prescription versus not is, well, is it really more around sort of, is it regulated or is it not? Can you download it on the app for, $1.99 or that's a, broad statement. Like, can you download it through an app store, or is it something that requires, much higher levels of regulation there? So,
absolutely.
I think that what Carrie was just speaking about around the coach angle, I think it's been very successful as an adherence and ability to enhance sort of digital therapeutics, and I don't see that not being digital therapeutic. Some people say like you have to be pure digital therapeutic or anything like that. It doesn't make sense. It's an enhancement on adherence and also efficacy sometimes. But I think how we sort of approach it is something similar, where it's like we don't in-house build our coaches, but we work with clinicians. So for example, with our IBS product, we work pretty heavily with dietitians, and so we build processes and products around them to help them work alongside their patients who are going through our products and act as a sort of referral channel partner. And we think they play a large role in that sort of integrative approach to, I think you were saying before, Brian, around involving drugs into digital therapeutics, and like that it's not necessarily one or the other, but we sort of see it as well. It's like involving the clinician as the third sort of party in that, where it's passing data to them as a way to give them access and give more sort of personalized, scalable approach as well.
Do you guys feel like there's what do you want to call it, a communication challenge for consumers or for medical professionals regarding this, what sometimes people refer to as the brave new world of digital health? In other words, you may have you may have a lot of clinicians who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s who've been practicing medicine for decades and decades, and if I understand things correctly, none of this existed when they were at med school or when they were junior doctors. Likewise with consumers. Are you guys feeling that there's a need for more or less communication? Is there a marketing overhype at the opposite end of the spectrum? What's your experience on that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. And I think if you look at the sort of trifecta of healthcare, the payers, providers, and the patients, right? In order for anything to move and be successful in the healthcare ecosystem, you have to move all of those pieces. So moving one of those pieces in a silo doesn't work. So we have to move payers along with providers, along with patients. And the advocacy and communication just takes time, right? So as we think about new technologies, we're finding that, the consumers, at least, are probably more of the early adopters. I mean, they're looking for solutions, especially the folks that we're treating with high unmet needs. Look at stroke, for example. We're helping people to improve walking post-stroke when they're years post-stroke with deficits, when there's literally nothing else on the market that can help these patients. So they're coming out and saying, we need anything, and we're willing to try anything. Right. And so I think that, as you think about messaging to them, that's probably the easier sell. You think about payers and providers, that takes time. There's a statistic in medicine that from the time that something is discovered in medicine until it begins to be implemented, so not widely adopted, but until the early adopters begin to use it, on average is 17 years. Wow. So if we just think about that for a moment, from the time we say, hey, this thing works, until early adopters take it on, it's on average 17 years. So that's the sort of phase of healthcare, the speed of healthcare that we think about addressing this. I think that advancements in technology and the evidence base that are coming up about digital therapeutics can help that timeline move faster, because there's so much evidence that can be gathered both in the real world, in clinical studies, et cetera, that can help move that needle. And I think we are starting to see the buzz of digital therapeutics starting to saturate the market on both the providers and the payer side as well. So, it is an uphill battle that we fight every day in moving healthcare, but I think it's moving nicely, in fact, at this moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, Brian, that's a very interesting statistic. I'm just making a note in my calendar for us to group in 17 years' time and to see how the progress is. But no, I suppose that's like a lot of technology. That's like the World Wide Web and the internet, and before that radio, and before that whatever, the the telegraph and things like that. These things do take a lot longer than we hope for them to take, don't they? What are some of your experiences, Carrie, in terms of you're coming at this more from the investor's perspective than the entrepreneur yourself, but obviously an incredibly important member of the ecosystem. What are some examples of challenges that you guys see, and what are some things you guys have invested in recently?
Yeah. So one thing that we certainly look at when we're exploring a company is really what involvement the provider would need to have, or the health system, or whoever that kind of care deliverer would need to have in adoption. And so really thinking about workflows and how embedded or kind of aligned with existing workflows the solution might be to ultimately get to that point of access for the patient, versus a completely separate experience or something that feels a little bit cobbled together. So again, the solution may be very sound, but if it starts to break down further upstream with, well, really, how do you identify the right patient for this solution? Or how do we make sure the physician doesn't ignore the alert that pops up in the EMR, or whatever those challenges could be, really embracing kind of the day in, day out and very fast-paced experience the provider has with seeing patients and trying to be efficient. That's very much part of our, analysis. One of the companies that we actually invested in to try to get at this infrastructure issue is a company called Zelf. So it's the word health, but the first letter is X. They're really a play where they're trying to enable the digital workflow or the clinical workflow really for digital health. So whether it be the ability to suggest a digital solution, or better use data to understand who might be eligible for a digital program, or even any type of intervention, but a better use of data.
Yes.
Becomes so essential. Understanding the diagnosis, the demographics, the eligibility from a payer perspective. Again, back to this point of, there are so many wonderful solutions out there, but if it's going to be an out-of-pocket cost for the patient, at least make the patient aware of it before you recommend it or order it for them, versus those solutions that might be fully reimbursed. So they're one play that's been important to us to keep an eye on. It's so easy to get very excited about all of the actual solutions, but making sure we're also keeping pace with the delivery of these solutions is really important. One other, investment that we made that we've since exited, but it was a company called Propeller Health, and that was actually a device that went on an inhaler for patients with uncontrolled asthma or COPD, and the device was specific to the inhaler, and ultimately, supported the patient through through an app that you could send messages to the patient around adherence and compliance, and sort of saying, hey, these are some of the factors that may lead to exacerbation of your disease today. Let's be mindful. It could also send data back to the customer, and the customer in this case might have been a provider or a PBM or some other type of healthcare entity, so that they could take in that data at a population level or at a patient level and try to intervene proactively before disease progression or exacerbation. So just another example of how to better use data, how to keep it personalized, but also take the bigger picture view. So again, the customer or the provider can use their time as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Very interesting.
Yeah, maybe one other company I love that I need to talk about, although I love, of course, all the companies in our portfolio, is a company called Evidation Health. And I'll just mention them because of a lot of the work that they do with pharma. That's the point that both Brian and Chris were making in the beginning. The better we can pair some of these solutions with existing therapeutics, if the traditional pharma therapeutic does exist and makes sense for that patient, the better we can use the data to build trust with the patient by understanding where they're at in their journey, understanding their needs, and intervening as appropriate, has proven to be very effective. So Evidation really builds that trust, engages the patient directly, and kind of learns about that patient and their day in, day out lives through various degrees of connectivity with the patient, as well as matching it with what they call system generated data. So not ignoring what happens inside the clinic, but can you put that together and have that much more longitudinal view of the patient, and then intervene appropriately around their care, around their therapy initiation, around adherence or persistence.
Oh, that sounds extremely interesting and very relevant. Chris, while we have a investor on the call, are you looking for money? What are your plans for this year?
Not looking for money right now, but
no.
Yeah.
Have you guys done any funding rounds for your business?
Yeah, so we've done. We raised our seed or pre-seed sort of end of 2019. And then stuff's don't need money at the moment, but we'll be cool to keep in touch.
Absolutely. And Carrie, I'm certain that Chris's valuation is way too low, so you should be buying very quickly before the price goes up.
Oh, I'm sure. Especially in this section right now, right?
Brian, what has your journey been in terms of fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken the typical approach. We've had a seed and Series A thus far. There will be, to commercialize a digital therapeutic and sort of how we think about it. I mean, it's a capital intensive and time intensive process, and so there will be future capital needs coming down the line. We're getting really excited about the fact, as we think about even access to and what moves the needle for access is. Yes. We've talked a lot about providers and payers and patients. We've also seen movement in the FDA in the US as well, and in sort of being more clear about how these things are regulated. And MedRhythms last June was granted breakthrough designation by FDA for our asset in stroke, in chronic stroke, to improve walking.
Nice.
But why this matters, and actually sort of why it's related, I think, to this question around fundraising, et cetera, is that there is also a proposed rule from CMS, which is the Center for Medicare Services, which provides Medicare for the U.S. That is a proposed rule that it's in a comment period right now, will hopefully be finalized in the near future, that would mandate reimbursement by CMS of breakthrough designation products. And so, to me, those are the things that help companies like ours scale. But more importantly than helping companies scale, that's what truly provides the access. The missing piece of all of this is the reimbursement, and having something like a Medicare or a government-run, healthcare system to mandate reimbursement for these products is a huge sort of catalytic moment for the companies that can take care of it, but also or take advantage of it, but also for the patients. And I think that those are the opportunities that get us excited about what the future looks like, and also obviously our capital needs into the future as well.
Yes, exactly.
I think, Barry, I think it's interesting because like us at Mindset Health and Brian with MedRhythm, taking very different approach to sort of a digital therapeutic, and I think it's varied by the nature of the products that we're building. So Carrie, I've got either two questions. You can pick one of the two. Which one do you prefer us answering? But either how do you feel, sort of, what would be your investor lens on both those approaches, and what does great look like? What are the best companies in the world doing with those approaches? And the second question, you can choose to answer which one. The second one is, how do you build products for providers? What are the learnings you've had from South?
Absolutely, those are really good questions. I don't have the perfect answer to either of them, of course, but the way we think about it, we like to invest at the stage where we believe a company is either about to hit or is kind of in the middle of that inflection point from a commercial perspective. So we say typically Series B. So what you were just describing, Brian, around reimbursement, those are the signals we ultimately are looking for. We are not seed investors, just thinking about kind of product and kind of helping the company get past proof of concept. We're thinking, what are the viable infrastructure pieces that need to be in place, either for delivery like a Zelf, or reimbursement or regulation. So we have stayed away. We've looked at a handful of the purely regulated prescription-only digital therapeutics plays. We've really liked them, but we've kind of hit pause for now, and we'll watch and see. Hopefully it won't take 17 years, but we'll watch and see what the uptake is, frankly, because so much relies on the provider. And that would be some of the questions we would be asking. How do you engage the provider? How do you think about digital versus traditional therapeutic, or the combination? In what order? Sure. What's happening in the EMR versus outside the EMR? What data is coming back to? Is it the care team? Is it a separate, third party that's supporting the care team? So those are a lot of questions that we are ultimately asking and trying to figure out that sweet spot of, hey, they've got general product market fit here. They know who the customer is. And I'll be honest, Chris, we've primarily been investing in solutions that are not selling into the provider from a digital therapeutics perspective. It's either selling into pharma, selling in some way, shape, or form to the self-insured employer, the payer, with the belief that as those pieces come together, the provider will be best set up to be the access point, not necessarily the payer for all of it. because that's where budgets get tough. Even with Zelf, any use case is relevant to Zelf practically. Any use case or any solution that could touch a patient where a provider's influence and the relationship between the provider and the patient can be leveraged. That could be a fit for Zelf to help deliver the right messaging to the patient. But it has to start with the provider having the appetite to act on this patient is eligible for such and such solution for Mindset Health or MedRhythms. Please order it for them. So either of your solutions could be relevant to Zelf today. And it's really about this critical mass of saying the world of digital is here. Health system, you don't need to figure out every piece of how the messaging occurs between point A to point B. Let's build a sustainable foundation for that and only bring in evidence-based solutions that we trust. Every time that message comes up to recommend the program, we know we have the right systems in place, the right vetting processes to say we can trust that recommendation for the patient. So I would say getting in and better understanding how some of these ecosystem builders, are going to market versus trying to do it all yourself from a supply chain standpoint. I mean, that's honestly a lot of what McKesson looks at. We're a supply chain player at our core, but we're starting to think much beyond that and how we can bring in these digital solutions and help some of the emerging players to get their solutions to market where we already have the network. So long response to trying to address, I guess, both, but really good questions. And these are the kinds of conversations we'd love to have on our investment team.
Awesome. Thanks.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, good question, Chris. And obviously, Carrie, thank you very much. Very, very helpful and informative information there. So, Brian, from your perspective, do you feel that the whole digital therapeutics, what do you want to call it, evolution is necessarily going to be more direct to consumer by way of the opportunities that present themselves and the challenges if you're trying to, how do you say it, go through the more orthodox regulatory environment?
So my fundamental belief is no. I mean, I think that it's, there's a lot of opportunities to start there, as, all of the challenges that Carrie mentioned about, the commercial infrastructure and changing behaviors of doctors. I mean, and also changing the behaviors of patients, right? And I mean, the whole trifecta needs the behavior change. However, I fundamentally believe that sort of the future of healthcare looks like digital therapeutics in a prescribed way. So I fundamentally also believe that as we build more evidence and as the world changes and as reimbursement opens up and regulation opens up, I mean, I guess on principle, I also fundamentally believe that if you are providing life-changing care to somebody, it does not matter whether it's a drug, whether it's a software, whether it's a person. If you are changing somebody's life, you're changing somebody's trajectory, there will be a way to get it to patients. And so, I do think that way of getting it to patients actually looks a lot more like traditional therapeutics in the future. So it's going to, no doubt, will take some time to get there, but that's where the industry is going because of the outcomes we're seeing.
No, that's a very good point. Hey, well, look, you guys, I'd love to invite you to come to the pub and to buy you a drink, and I'd love to continue this conversation for about another hour. This is very, very interesting, but I'm sorry to say we're a little bit low on time. So we'll aim to wrap up over the next few minutes, if that's okay with you guys. And very, very keen to invite all of you to come back to the show maybe a few months from now to continue this very interesting and worthwhile discussion. So we're just going to summarize now. I'll ask you guys individually if you want to share with us anything that you're doing specifically, any ask that you have to our community. Are you hiring? Do you have a product launch coming up? Are you looking for investors? Are you coming up with a new announcement this year? So like I said, just in summary, just want to hear a little bit more about what your plans are for this year, or any requests or notifications you want to make to our international healthcare innovation community. So Chris, we'll begin with you if that's okay. What are you guys working on? Any announcements, any product launches? What's coming up with you?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're pretty focused on our product called Nerva. So it's for irritable bowel syndrome. It's a 6-week program followed by maintenance ongoing care. So if you have IBS, please check it out. I think in terms of more towards this audience, I think we're really trying to explore we're currently purely direct to consumer effectively. We're really trying to explore the provider angle and in the future reimbursement angle. So I would love to speak with anyone who has a keen interest with working with providers and building products for providers. I think I'm going to reach out to Carrie afterwards. just understanding that sort of angle is something that I'm really interested in, and we're trying to do now. And we've just about launched, in about 2 weeks, we're going to launch a product called Mindset Connect, and that'll help connect dietitians with their patients for IBS. So really excited about that, and keen to get any providers that are interested on board. Yeah, anyone interested in direct-to-consumer, I think a bit different to Brian, very, very keen on the direct-to-consumer angle, at least at the starting point, and to build from that. And so if you're an investor interested in the direct-to-consumer angle and understanding digital therapeutics, I'd love to talk with you. We're not currently raising, but yeah, keen to keep the conversation going.
Excellent. No, that sounds very good. As I mentioned at the beginning of this show, Chris, GIANT Health is a community of nearly 200,000 people now. That includes quite a lot of providers, both in the US, in Europe, and farther afield. So let's also continue that conversation, because I'm sure we can help you with quite a lot of introductions. And we're very ambitious to follow your successful journey and do what we can to support you.
Thanks, Barry. That's awesome.
And likewise, Carrie, let us know, what do you guys have in mind for the rest of this year, and any announcements or new initiatives you'd like to share with our community?
We're just, we're excited about the performance of our portfolio thus far. We've seen quite a few exits actually recently, so I would say our portfolio is really starting to mature. Not slowing down at all from an investment perspective, and are very much looking at companies in the, certainly the digital therapeutic space, anything related to oncology care and sort of digital care for oncology, anything around biopharma, both clinical and commercial services are kind of areas that I personally spend a lot of time in, complex chronic care. So any companies in those spaces, we'd love to talk to you, even if it's a little bit on the earlier side. I mentioned we're not doing kind of seed stage, but it's great to start to build the relationship. We really want to have a diverse portfolio, both from an entrepreneur perspective and the solutions that we're helping to, do any little bit we can to help bring to market.
Excellent. Carrie, do you guys have a geographic focus?
We primarily invest in the United States, North America, but we have a couple of investments that have been outside the United States. The one other thing I should mention, just given the breadth of McKesson, we're always happy to talk to players that may touch Europe. Certainly, I mentioned North America, but Canada as well, besides the US. And we may be able to route people or think about what we call portfolio development. So even if it may not be a fit from our investment, we may be able to make introductions from a business development standpoint, or we're always trying to think about other investors that we know where we might be able to make an introduction if there could be another fit outside of our fund.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, that's very helpful information. Thank you for sharing that. And likewise, we're certainly keen to get you back on the program maybe in a few months to continue comparing notes and talking about this incredibly important subject. So likewise, Brian, we're just wrapping up now. What are your plans for the rest of this year? Any announcements you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, from our perspective, we are spending the rest of the year building the infrastructure for the commercial launch of our chronic stroke product, which will be next year. But we're spending a lot of time and effort there. And the sort of progress that's been made with regulatory and CMS to date has been very helpful in that process. We also are about to begin 5 clinical trials on our pipeline with some of the top researchers in the US.
Wow.
Including a study in multiple sclerosis, a study in Parkinson's disease. We're wrapping up a study with the Cleveland Clinic in MS right now, which is really exciting. So expanding that pipeline. And then we do have a very exciting partnership announcement that I can't disclose at the moment, but will be announced hopefully within the next few weeks that you can keep an eye out for. But it's exciting times, and as we think about this, I'm looking to connect with anybody that wants to talk about digital therapeutics in whatever form that is. As we know, in order to provide access, this is going to take a team, and it's going to take literally everybody. So anybody that wants to, collaborate, have a conversation, I'm always open to that. That's the only way we become successful. And when we become successful, that means when patients get access to care that they need. And so thank you for the opportunity, Barry.
Excellent. No, it's my pleasure. And how exciting you have that partnership announcement coming up. Does it rhyme with Amazon or anything like that?
Yeah, it does not rhyme with Amazon, but it'll have a nice ring to it, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, we're looking forward to that. And obviously, do please let us know, because we'd love to champion that when you're ready to make that announcement. But you guys, what a pleasure speaking with you all. Honestly, this has been so incredibly interesting, and I've learned a lot, and I hope you guys have as well. These are important conversations. This is about taking steps to innovate in healthcare. Our vision at Giant Health is to improve the health and the well-being of people around the world by facilitating innovation and championing tech entrepreneurs and investors in the world of healthcare. So for us, it's an absolute privilege to be having you guys on the show. Very, very keen to keep in touch with you. Thank you once again for your time. We recognize that your time is incredibly valuable, and we're grateful for that. So Chris, thank you very much, and good luck with everything. Likewise, Carrie, so glad to have you on the show, and thank you. And Brian as well. And thanks as well for making the allocation during all of the time zones. I think we have a lot of time zones around the world represented right now. So that's quite handy. I suppose that is in and of itself an example of the digital world we're living in. But very good stuff. So once again, thank you. And obviously, my name is Barry Shrier. I have been your host on this week's episode of GIANT's Healthy Innovators Live TV. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Vodafone Business and Barclays Bank and McKinsey & Company. Thanks you guys for the sponsorship. And one final reminder to all of our audience around the world, we're running European Health Tech Innovation Week, which this year is from the 17th to the 21st of May. Please go to the Giant website, www.giant.health, to learn more about that. We invite everybody to participate. We are supporting healthcare tech entrepreneurs and established businesses. We have sponsorship from some of the largest global pharma companies and medtech hardware businesses. And we're doing everything we can to bring everybody together to facilitate your successful innovations and successful implement newer, better healthcare outcomes at lower cost. So we hope to join you guys, and we hope you all can participate in European Health Tech Innovation Week. Once again, my name is Barry Shrier. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode. This is weekly episodes of Giant's Healthy Innovators Live TV. Thank you very much. Good. Pariah, how'd that go? Everything okay?